Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would talk about this subject that I found to be very particularly interesting. And we're going to review a video by a boxing ego within this little video here. And I think that this debate is going to be very interesting. I have not watched the video, and for all my videos, I really don't watch the video beforehand. That way, I have the most authentic reaction as possible. But like I said, for those of you that are kind of new to my channel, I like to review certain videos, maybe from that of other channels or, certain interviews or something like that, because I don't like to just get my perspective in there at times. I think at times it's also important to get other people's perspective in there so I can kind of react to every comment that a lot of fans or a lot of people might be thinking of in the first place. Because if you just hear my perspective, at least in a certain video, then I might forget something, or I might forget to debate something or bring up a certain point. So that's why, certain people may ask, why do you review a certain amount of videos? That's the reason why. So I can pretty much give the best analyzation breakdown possible. A lot of my videos are reaction videos, and I just kind of give you my perspective. But I also have a lot of videos where I just talk by myself as well. And I'm sure more of those will come, but I'm going to have a little bit more time with editing and other stuff like that. So I'll have to figure more of that out. But anyways, in this video, the debate is going to be about Terence Bud Crawford and Mr. Naoya Inoue. And the question is, of course, about both of those fighters is that who could debatably be the #1 pound-for-pound fighter? And if you're going to talk to me or ask me who do I believe is the #1 pound-for-pound fighter, I think there's probably a good 4, maybe 5, maybe even 6 fighters that you maybe could possibly debate as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter, just in my personal view. If you were to debate Terence Bud Crawford, I could not have a problem with that. If you were to debate Naoya Inoue, I cannot have a problem with that. If you were going to debate Alexander Usyk, I certainly cannot have a problem with that. If you were still going to debate Canelo Alvarez, I could not have a problem with that. And I could even, see it, and some might say it's a little bit more of a stretch. I could even see Tyson Fury, debatably, if you wanted to put him there, even though that's a bit tougher because he's only in one weight division. And I even could maybe see a case for that at Devin Haney. Those are probably the 6 fighters right there that I would say that maybe if you were going to debate that they're the #1 pound-for-pound fighter, I couldn't really, have a huge problem with it. But, like I've already said for the past few years, my top 5 pound-for-pound list, it pretty much has been locked within, these 5 to 6 fighters. I've had Terence Crawford there. I've had Canelo Alvarez there. I've had Alexander Usyk there. When it comes down to it, I've had that of Errol Spence Jr. there. No longer, of course, after the most recent performance over Terence Bud Crawford. I've had Tyson Fury there. And now, of course, I have to have Mr. Naoya Inoue there after what he recently accomplished this year. And this, in my view, of course, was the greatest and biggest year, probably for both Terence Bud Crawford and that of Mr. Naoya Inoue. And the reason why that is because both of these guys have actually had very similar careers. Both have been extraordinarily dominant throughout their career, and people take a look at them and they think that they're great athletes, and on top of that, exceptional fighters and exceptional boxers, that they're very intelligent, that they're very graceful, and that they pretty much can do almost anything within that of the ring. You could debate maybe who you would see as the more talented fighter. That's up to you. But the big problem with Terence Bud Crawford and also Mr. Naoya Inoue always is that people did not think that they were yet in a fight to where they did not know whether they could win or not. What do I mean by that? Basically a fight to where you don't know whether they're the complete favorite or not. And both Terence Bud Crawford and Naoya Inoue, now, whatever you want to say about them or whatever doubts you had before, whether you want to put them as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter or not, I think that you at the very least have to say that they're a top 5 pound-for-pound fighter. And ironically, I think that both of the biggest fights of their career happen literally within the same week within each other. I think Inoue and Fulton, I think they fought earlier in the week because it was in Japan. I think that fight happened on a Monday or Tuesday, and then Terence Bud Crawford, he ended up fighting Errol Spence Jr. on that Saturday. So actually both of these fighters, it was very ironic. It almost seems like they're a little bit somewhat tied together, at least when you talk about that kind of coincidentally, But when it comes down to it, there was a lot of people that would predict that Steven Fulton would have beaten Naoya Inoue and that Errol Spence would have beaten Terence Bud Crawford. I actually was one of those people. I personally predicted that Steven Fulton would beat Naoya Inoue, even though I thought it was a 50-50 level fight. I also predicted Errol Spence Jr. to beat that of Terence Bud Crawford, even though I also thought that it was a 50-50 level fight. I ended up being wrong on both of them. And I'm not surprised that Terence Bud Crawford and Naoya Inoue ended up winning their fights, but with the fashion that they ended up doing it. And there's been a lot of surprises this year, like Teofimo Lopez kind of dogging that of Josh Taylor or completely dominating him later on down the stretch, even though he was just coming off of a very shaky performance over Sandor Martin, who's a decent contender, but still has never been a legitimate champion fighter, or a legitimate champion anyways in his career. That was a little bit of a surprise to a certain amount of people. I'm not surprised that Teofimo won, but it was a little bit surprising to see that Josh just had no answers. Demetrius Andrade losing to Benavidez did not surprise me. I predicted Benavidez to win that fight, but the fact that Andrade had lost within 6 rounds and actually stopped within mid-rounds, I mean, a lot of people are going to take a look at his career very differently now. The fact that he just had no stamina whatsoever and got stopped, Deontay Wilder getting completely outboxed by a Joseph Parker that was just stopped about a year ago in brutal fashion against that of Joe Joyce. Joe Joyce being knocked out by Zhang in 2 of those fights. None of these majorly shell-shock me, but there's been a lot of surprises this year. But the reason why there's been a lot of surprises this year is because a lot of the big fights are finally happening. And when you're finally in that matchup to where you have pretty much a 50-50 chance of winning or losing, that is when we truly know how great that you actually are. Well, there's no doubt about it that Terence Bud Crawford and Inoue, that they were in the biggest fights of their career this year. And not only did they end up winning their fights, but they absolutely dismantled their opponents. If you would have told me that Terence Bud Crawford would have whooped Errol Spence Jr.'s ass the way that he did in the fight this year, I would have probably not believed it. And if you would have told me that Inoue would have won every single round against Stephon Fulton and that the fight would have not been competitive from the first sound of the bell to where the referee stopped the fight, I also would have had a very hard time believing it. That was a little bit of a surprise. The fact that not only did they win their fights, but they did it in such dominating fashion that you could easily debate either one of these fighters as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter. You easily could. And of course, on top of that, you're talking about 2 fighters that this year became undisputed within that of 2 separate weight divisions, or at least became undisputed in their second weight division this year. And Inoue, of course, was recently able to do it against that of Marlon Tapales, I believe, in the 122-pound weight division. And Crawford was able to do it earlier against Errol Spence Jr. this year. I think in September or something around that, or August against that of Errol Spence Jr. So the question in the debate now is this: who really actually is the #1 pound-for-pound fighter, and who is debatably the better and the greater fighter and the more deserving fighter of the 2 of the #1 pound-for-pound spot between that of Terence Crawford and Naoya Inoue? We're going to talk about it. Let's see what Boxing Ego has to say. Let's get straight into it.
Cause I'm down for my boom, doo 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 doo. Up them other ninjas, cause I'm down for my ninjas. What? I ride for my ninjas. I up them other ninjas. Shakur Stevenson, he riding with his brother, Terence Bud Crawford. He said it ain't no debate. Terence Crawford got to be pound for pound #1, not Naoya Inoue. That's
Well, I'm just going to state this personally. I'm not going to say that there's no debate about it. Now, the thing is that if you're talking about a legitimate pound-for-pound debate, you can't really take what Shakur Stevenson says. We all know that Shakur Stevenson and Terence Crawford, they're basically like older brother and little brother. Terence Crawford has been a great mentor to that of Shakur Stevenson. They've been sparring partners. They've had similar problems with that of Bob Arum and blah, blah, blah. You can't really go off of what he says. What I'll say is this: I would also have Terence Bud Crawford at the moment as my #1 pound-for-pound fighter, but I don't think that it would be correct to say that it's just not a debate. I think that when you talk about a fighter that was #1 pound-for-pound, that wouldn't be a debate. To be honest with you, I think the last fighter that probably would have been Canelo Alvarez. And, a certain amount of the people would disagree and will say, what are you talking about? Terence Crawford was there and all this other stuff. Right, but the reason why Canelo, in my view, at least before he lost to Dimitri Bivol, the reason why he was the 100% undisputed #1 pound-for-pound fighter is because he was facing almost repeated A-grade contender after A-grade contender. And people can say whatever they want to about Caleb Plant and Saunders and all these other guys. At the end of the day, Saunders at one point in time was looked at as one of the best middleweights in the world. And when he was about to fight Demetrius Boo Andrade, people were calling it a super fight. That's what they were saying. They were saying that it was going to be the biggest fight in Andrade's career. And then as soon as Saunders fought that at Canelo Alvarez, then, he has no power, he has no this. But remember, Andrade is the guy that apparently is going to embarrass Canelo. Right, so then why is Billy Joe Saunders so weak for Canelo Alvarez, but then for Andrade, it's a great fight? That doesn't make any sense. Caleb Plant also was an A-grade level fighter, and Callum Smith, You know, of course, he's kind of a stiff British fighter, but he's also a guy that had some decent wins at the 168-pound weight division. So all those guys, at the very least, in my view, were A-minus level fighters. He was a 4-weight division champion. And on top of that, the resume with Canelo, it really wasn't close to anybody else. He had Danny Jacobs, he had Gennady Golovkin, he had Cotto, he had Kovalev, Saunders, Plant, Smith, you know, Trout, Lara, literally all those names. I mean, all those names that I just mentioned, you could clearly debate as A-grade level names. That's why, in my view, he was the undisputed #1 pound-for-pound fighter, because not only was he as dominant as everyone else, but he was doing it against A-grade elite level competition. You know, but of course, ever since the Bivol loss, you know, he's lost a little bit of that esteem. But if you still wanted to debate him as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter, I could see it. I would just probably put him a little bit lower, but that's up to you. But as of right now, I would probably put Crawford just ever so slightly above Naoya Inoue. And the reason why that is because for you to be at least my 100% #1 pound-for-pound fighter, you have to defeat someone that, in my view, would have been on my top 10 pound-for-pound list or on most top 10 pound-for-pound lists. Now, to be fair, the LDBC and new media, they have put Steven Fulton, basically because he's a black American fighter, but they put him on their top 10 pound-for-pound list. So if if people are debating that Inoue is #1 pound-for-pound, you can't really claim, racial prejudice. You can't really claim overall that, it's racist and all sort of stuff, because at one point in time, you had Steven Fulton as one of your top 10 pound-for-pound guys. You predicted Fulton to beat Naoya Inoue, and on top of that, he has pretty much the same accomplishments, if not even more accomplishments than that of Terence Bud Crawford. But just from my logical point of view, I would put Terence Bud Crawford over that at Inoue, because Spence at one point in time was in my top 5 pound-for-pound. I don't think I would have put Fulton ever on my top 10 pound-for-pound list, even though you could have debated him there. But he would have been more top 20 for me. But that's up for you to decide, really. But that's why I would probably have Terence Crawford, just in my view, as my #1 pound-for-pound fighter.
What I want to talk about in this video, what up, Fight World? It's your boy Ego, and I'm back with some more boxing. Make sure you come in, subscribe to the channel. Best in the business, best to ever do this. You guys see the social media handles at the top of this video. Follow me on X, Instagram, and also YouTube. Now, Shakur Stevenson took to his social media, and he had to air things out. Make sure you guys hit the thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and to be notified, hit the bell notification icon.
I've already said this about Naoya Inoue, and Naoya Inoue, just in terms of boxing, he might debatably be the best athlete on the planet. I mean, once again, he's an Oriental fighter. He's a Japanese fighter. And like I said, unless you're Manny Pacquiao, it's going to be a little bit harder to promote some of these Asian fighters, especially to that of the westernized societies, to that of America or Britain or some of these other guys. But almost everyone knows about Naoya Inoue at this point. I wouldn't say that he's the face of boxing or anything like that in terms of his star appeal. But Inoue is a guy that when you just take a look at his boxing ability, that's why I compare him almost to the Japanese version of Roy Jones Jr. Not necessarily 100% in the way that they fight, but Roy Jones Jr. was one of those guys to where it's almost like they built him in a lab. His power, his speed, his movement, just his pure athleticism was just raw talent. There was almost no one that could compete with him. The thing is about Inoue is that I don't know if there's one fighter that's anywhere near his size that can compete with his athleticism. And that's not me saying that he's always in weak divisions or that he's just facing weak people. I just think that Inoue is just one of those raw, talented, gifted athletes. He's just one of those guys that he's just a guy that could have been built in a laboratory. He's just phenomenal. His power, he has one-shot power. His speed is phenomenal. He has great movement when he needs to. His defense at times could maybe be a little bit better, but at his best against Steven Fulton, he showed that his defense was elite, as did Terence Bud Crawford against Errol Spence Jr. Both of those fighters, actually, in my view, have had a little bit of a problem of getting hit too much, and not being as elite defensively as what they could. But then in their fights where they needed to show it, they did. And they were pristine. They were absolutely flawless with their defense in both of those fights. So it's just going to be very hard for any fighters to beat those type of guys.
Somebody made this graphic. It says, who's #1 pound for pound? And it has the king crown, and it's a picture of Naoya Inoue on the left.
The size of the tool is the most important for the woman. You probably already know. What you don't...
On the left, and it has Terence Crawford on the right. Shakur Stevenson takes to his social media and says, This ain't debatable. Bud is number one. Stop trying to always take credit from Broski. So you see, Shakur Stevenson ain't having it. He said you gotta...
Right, but this is also the problem with a lot of these LDBC and new media channels. And to be fair, Boxing Ego actually, I think, has been, you know, somewhat correct on the Terence Bud Crawford situation. And he's been one of the few that have stated that Crawford has not always had that of the strongest resumes. I have agreed with this, you know. But the thing is that a lot of these LDBC and new media channels, for example, they always claim that Terence Bud Crawford, at least in new media channels, they always claim that Crawford was the number one pound for pound. Like Dante's Boxing Nation and Aki TV, they always claim that Terence Bud Crawford was number one pound for pound. And the reason why, there was pretty much no other reason other than he was the most dominant fighter in the world. Now, they tried to beef up his resume because, oh, he's fighting a former Olympian and Aegis Kavalaskas, and he's fighting, you know, elite Mexican fighters like Jose Benavidez and, you know, all this sort of stuff. But for those of us that know boxing, we know damn well that those guys are no damn A-grade level fighters. Those guys are not A-grade level fighters, you know. But my point being is this. If you were going to argue during Canelo Alvarez's reign, in my view, as the clear number one pound for pound fighter, at least in my view, you know, and you were going to say that Crawford was the number one guy because of his dominance and his skill set, you should really not have a huge problem with Inoue being debated over Terence Bud Crawford. And you certainly can't debate that people are arguing it, you know, because of racial things and all sort of stuff, when you were doing a very similar thing with Terence Crawford when Canelo Alvarez was on top.
Give his brother Terence Crawford all the props, all the praise in the world. He's the number one fighter. Now, I made videos about Terence Crawford. He pretty much went to his social media and proclaimed the same thing. Like, he says, I'm that dude. This is my era. I'm pound for pound. So it's clear Terence Crawford feels exactly the same way as Shakur.
And I don't have a problem with Terence Bud Crawford believing that. If you're Terence Crawford, Canelo, Tyson Fury, Alexander Usyk, any one of those fighters, you know, Naoya Inoue, you should have that same mentality. I don't have a problem with that because any one of those fighters could debate that, you know, that they're the best of their era, or at least, you know, within their weight division. So I don't really have a problem with that.
Stevenson. What does ego think? The ego thoughts? After a word from our sponsor. Stay tuned to the end of this video. The future is now. The Hyper color RG style headphones to the nation. Best Pac, Nas, and Big ain't no best. East, West, North, South, lost out, greedy. I embrace y'all with napalm. Listen, who's the best?
A lot of these guys are such wannabe rappers.
Ego thoughts. I gotta say it's Terence Crawford. Terence Crawford gotta be number one. Stop playing with him. See, the thing about me, you heard, is I ain't a hater. I picked Terence Crawford to lose, so
Well, you are a hater of Terence Bud Crawford, and even you admitted that yourself, that you and Terence Bud Crawford have a personal issue, and that's why, a part of it, of why you were talking a little bit on Terence Bud Crawford. It is what it is. But at the end of the day, Boxing Ego, he also has a little bit of a racial loyalty. So even with Terence Bud Crawford, you know, if he is going to, even if Inoue had a great case, he's not really going to pick any of those fighters over for the number one pound for pound fighter, more than likely over Terence Bud Crawford. Now, is that me stating that Ego is being biased here, or that he doesn't truly believe that Crawford is the number one pound for pound fighter? No, that's not what I'm saying. You know, but once again, a lot of these guys, they make certain points for black fighters to be higher on the pound for pound list, and they love to play this victimization mentality, but then certain things come back in the same way with other fighters and they don't seem to have the same standards.
Would I be, and who would I be to not give props when I was wild wrong? You know, I never picked against Terence Crawford, and the one time I picked against Terence Crawford in the Aerospins.
Well, why would you pick against Terence Bud Crawford in any other fight? What fight was he in, besides that of the Aerospins Jr. fight, where you really thought that he was going to lose? And one could kind of debate that about Inoue as well. But to be fair, one could actually debate that Inoue's been in more fights where he could have potentially lost, or where people thought maybe that he could have potentially lost than that of Crawford. Because to be fair, even though a lot of people don't really know it, the Jamie McDonnell fight was a fight where a certain amount of people were not 100% sure. The Emmanuel Rodriguez fight was another one where people were not sure. And then, of course, the Stephon Fulton fight.
Earlier this year, in July, I believe, he made me regret it. He made me, like, you know, and it's not like he made me into a believer, because I've always told you that Terence Crawford can fight. He can adapt. You know, he has different styles, if you will, and he finds a way to win. He's very competitive. I told that to Terence Crawford's face one time. You know, I said I'll beat him in a game of Uno, and he was like, nah. Like, and he was just competitive just in and of itself.
Terence Bud Crawford is a super competitive person. He's almost like another Michael Jordan. Some of these other boxers are as well, to where basically, you know, they just, they want to win in everything. You know, Michael Jordan was the same way.
So it got to be Terence Crawford. For me, I agree with Shakur Stevenson 1,000%. This is not even debatable. It's not something that I have to go back and forth and like.
Well, I'm not going to say that it's not debatable. But what I'll say is this. I do think that Terence Bud Crawford does have the edge. To say that it's not even relatively close, or to say that it's not debatable, I don't think I would quite go that far. But I would say that if you're having a debate about who is the #1 pound-for-pound fighter, I do think that Terence Bud Crawford does win that argument.
Dog my brain. Like, this is not...
At least at the moment.
It's like there's certain, let's say the Academy Awards, the Oscars. There's certain movies where it's like, nah, Denzel got to win that. I don't care. None of them other movies. I watched the other movies, and nobody had a better performance than Denzel in Glory or Denzel in Training Day. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Right, but here's the problem. And if we're going to talk about that debate, and the LDBC and the media channels, we all know they're going to stick up for their boys at the end of the day. We all get that, and I admire it to a degree. But, you know, the thing is that if you were going to debate that is not even close, you would have to say that Naoya Inoue is not undisputed in 2 separate weight classes like that of Terence Bud Crawford. You would have to say that he was less dominant in his 50-50 fight against Fulton overall than, you know, what Terence Bud Crawford was. They were both just as dominant. You would have to debate, you know, who maybe has more champions. And if we're actually going to go there, it probably is Naoya Inoue from what I remember. I believe that he has more champions on his resume. Now, that being said, now this is where Terence Bud Crawford wins the debate for me. Who do you believe was the more elite fighter of the two? You know, in terms of their big fight, who has the bigger pound-for-pound win? I would say Terence Bud Crawford, because I would definitely put Errol Spence Jr. above Steve Von Coolboy Fulton. Just my view.
Yeah, it's not like I put a gun to your head, huh? Jay! Yeah, you know I'm surgical with this bit. Yeah, my man. Right? So certain years...
Apparently I heard that Boxing Ego was a failed actor. or that he was an actor. I could see it. This dude's always doing impressions and everything like that. And you know what? I don't always mind it.
It's just kind of definitive. You watch the nominees, and if you watch the movies, you're like, nah, Brad Pitt got to win that. Leonardo DiCaprio got to win that. Or whoever the person is that given year. You know what I mean? So sometimes it's like that. And right now, #1 pound for pound, it's like that. It got to be Bud Crawford.
Right, but you can't just say something overall where it got to be like that, because when we're talking about, if we're just comparing it to Oscar-winning performances, Naoya Inoue and Terence Bud Crawford, you know, they, you know, had similar performances. They were just as good as the other in terms of their performances, and they did the same thing this year. But the thing, once again, which puts Terence Bud Crawford in terms of front of Inoue, is that he beat the greater fighter of the two. And that Errol Spence was looked at as one of the top 5, some may even say top 3 or top 2 pound-for-pound fighters at the time, and Crawford completely dismantled him. Steve Von Coolboy Fulton at times was on the top 10 pound-for-pound list, but I don't think people would have compared him quite to that of Errol Spence Jr. So that's the point to where if you're Boxing Ego, you probably bring up that point. Also very interesting, once again, you see Terence Bud Crawford wearing a snack shirt right there. Once again, I've always stated that the snack program, in my view, they are PED users, just my opinion. Very interesting how Ego and a lot of these other guys, when it came to Inoue complaining about the VADA drug testing, that they were on his ass and alleging that he more than likely is on steroids. But Terence Bud Crawford is in the snack program, and Shakur Stevenson is in the snack program, and Devin Haney's in the snack program, and Andrade's in the snack program, and none of these guys get any allegations, even though they're working with a former supplier of steroids, Victor Conte, who more than likely is still supplying his fighters and athletes with steroids.
Because, first of all, people want to play dumb. And see, this is what I hate about boxing. I hate it. Because people act like bozos in this sport. Like, almost as if it's a gang, like Crip or Blood. If you wearing a blue flag, you can't wear the red flag.
Right, I agree. And the LDBC and new media, there's no bigger cult than that of the pro-black cult, which is known as new media. You guys stick up for your own, and to a degree, I can admire it. I respect it to a degree. But when it becomes a problem is when there's a clear racial bias, there's double standards, and in some of your reviews or some of your analyzations, there's clearly a narrative afoot or an agenda that you're trying to spread. So let's not talk about that.
I like Naoya Inoue. He's a good fighter.
Oh, there's Claressa Shields. There's Claressa Shields, miss. I can knock out Gennady Golovkin and Sean Porter. Then she gets in the ring against someone 47-pound dude or whatever, gets hit with a left hook, gets put to sleep.
But I'm not going to lie.
Then she went on that Deontay Wilder excuse and said that he either put something in the gloves or took out Patton. Once again, and I'm not one for hitting women or anything like that, but certain women like this, Claressa Shields, she's not going to understand overall the difference of power and build between a man and a woman in the ring until she gets either her ass whooped or she gets knocked on the canvas a couple more times.
For him or any other fighter on my channel, Terence Crawford got more fights. He got more variety in the opponents.
He has more fights, but what does that really mean? I'm sorry, but that's always been a stupid point that the LDBC and new media have always brought up. When Vasily Lomachenko was debated as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter, Gervonta Tank Davis and all these other guys, they were like, oh, well, he only has 13 fights, so that's disrespectful to put him as a #1 pound-for-pound fighter. Right, but at the end of the day, no one else was doing what Lomachenko was doing. He was fighting champion after champion after champion after champion after champion when he just entered professional boxing. Now, of course, he had a great amateur pedigree, so he had a certain amount of experience against a multitude of styles, but that's why he was ranked as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter. If we're going to go off of this, he has more fights and all sort of stuff, I mean, then we would have to completely change at times the pound-for-pound list. So you can't go off of who has more fights. You have to go off overall who has the greater resume, who's beaten more champions, who's beaten the more elite fighters. And, that's why Inoue and Crawford, when you talk about it, Inoue, I believe, has actually beaten more champions than that of Terence Bud Crawford, at least when they held the belt. But what puts Crawford slightly ahead of Inoue, in my view, is that Errol Spence Jr. win.
That he's fighting. He's fighting. If you look at Crawford, he don't fight one style. He fight no matter who. It's a mean machine, somebody who can box and punch a bit. He's fighting Errol Spence, who's the big.
Right, but is Naoya Inoue really fighting one style, Mr. Ego? The man has fought Emmanuel Rodriguez. He's fought Nonito Donaire. He fought Steven Coolboy Fulton, the style that a lot of people said that Inoue was not going to be able to handle. We have to give Naoya Inoue some credit. Now, I understand within those weight divisions, at times, it's not always the most talented. But it's not like Naoya Inoue is just fighting these fighters that at times cannot fight. Now, don't get me wrong. That's not me saying that every single one of the fighters is an A-grade level fighter. But he's fought a multitude of styles.
Power, boxer, puncher, an Olympian. He's fought other Olympians like Felix Diaz. He's fought kind of mindless brawlers with a big punch like John Molina. So it's you give any puzzle piece to Terence Crawford, he's figuring a way out.
Right, and you can debate the same thing about Naoya Inoue. I don't really understand this point. I mean, maybe if you wanted to debate that he hasn't fought quite someone as talented as Errol Spence Jr. or someone quite all around as, as was maybe what he would be. I mean, I understand that if you wanted to bring up that point. But it's not like Inoue hasn't fought a multitude of styles. He fought Emmanuel Rodriguez. He fought Donaire. He fought Steven Coolboy Fulton, the black American fighter that a lot of people said he wouldn't be able to handle. So I don't understand the point, once again, of, he's beaten a multitude of styles. What puts Terence Crawford over Naoya Inoue at the moment, in my view, at least in a logical point of view, is that Errol Spence pound-for-pound win. Because in almost every category, Crawford and Inoue, they're almost basically tied. But you would have to put Crawford's resume just ever so slightly ahead of Inoue. And when I say resume, I'm not talking about the amount of champions that you've beaten. I'm talking about the quality of them. And I don't know if Inoue has ever quite fought a fighter that has been the same quality of that of Errol Spence Jr. That's where you're going to win that debate.
Looking at Inoue's opponent, there's not really that much diversity in the styles that he's fighting. No one that I'm looking at is yo, I think this guy's going to beat Inoue. Right,
and how many fighters that have fought Terence Bud Crawford have you said, oh my God, he's going to beat Terence Bud Crawford? Was it Aegis Kavalauskas? Was it Jeff Horn? Was it Jose Benavidez? Was it Felix Diaz? Was it Julius Ndongo? Come on, really?
Came undisputed by fighting Paul Butler. You know what I mean? And he's like...
Right, and Terence Bud Crawford became undisputed by fighting Victor Postal, Thomas Delorme, and Julius Ndongo. I understand what you're talking about, but at the end of the day, he also became undisputed because he defeated Steve Von Fulton, you know, and also Marlon DePales. I don't know if I would say Marlon DePales is quite an A-grade level fighter. Maybe you could debate it, A-, but that's kind of a debate. I don't know if I would say that. I understand what Ego is talking about. Listen, once again, what's going to win you that debate when it comes to Terence Bud Crawford is that Inoue just doesn't quite have a win like what an Errol Spence Jr. does. And that's not necessarily his fault because I don't know if there's really anyone around those weight divisions to where they're on that Errol Spence Jr. level. But that, in my view, is what would put Terence Crawford just ever so slightly ahead of Inoue.
Come on, bro. And you could say, oh, but Crawford fought Ndongo. At the time, at least, Ndongo had a couple cool wins like Ricky Burns. He knocked the train.
Ricky Burns that was getting older and had already lost almost every big fight in his career. And then he knocked out an undefeated Russian fighter who was never that good in the first place, like Edward Troianovsky or whatever the hell his name was. Julius Ndongo is not an A-grade level fighter. And you've even said that in the past when it came to your boy Errol Spence Jr. But now when it comes to Naoya Inoue, all of a sudden it's a little bit different. You know, listen, I understand. And I think Ego is trying to be the most logical here. I understand what he means. But at the end of the day, is Julius Ndongo really much better than a lot of the fighters that Inoue has fought? Is he really even that much better than Paul Butler? I'm not quite so sure about that. What I will say is that if we're comparing Julius Ndongo to a lot of the fighters that Inoue has fought, I would not put him over guys like Emmanuel Rodriguez. I certainly wouldn't put him over Steve-On Coolboy Fulton. I don't think I would even put him over Nonito Donaire.
Which was a rated guy, and he was pretty tall and big, and it was Crawford that took his...
There's no offense against Julius Ndongo, but that guy was such an awkward boxer. He did not have great boxing ability whatsoever.
The fighters and Crawford's been doing that. Like, in a way, when's the last time he took a guy's O? You know, somebody that you thought was super sound and thought could beat him, and he took their O. Because that's exactly what Terence Crawford did to Errol Spence. A guy...
That's not necessarily the worst point, but Inoue has done it to fighters. He did it against Emmanuel Rodriguez. He did it against that of Steve-On Coolboy Fulton. He did it against a few other fighters. You know, I mean, I understand what you're trying to say, but, you know, if we're going to go off of that, then you would have to allege that Terence Bud Crawford, that his resume is better than Errol Spence Jr.'s because Errol Spence defeated Danny Garcia and Sean Porter, and they weren't undefeated fighters when he beat him. So, I mean, I think I understand what Ego is trying to say, that in a way with some of the fighters that, you know, they already have a couple losses or they've already lost before. But it's like, is that really a hill that you want to die on for that point? I'm not quite so sure about that.
That even myself thought would beat Terence Crawford.
Because if you want to talk about Jose Benavidez and, you know, Aegis Kavaliauskas and a lot of these other guys, like, sure, he's taken away their O, but it's like, I mean, come on. Like, these guys could have fought Danny Garcia, and he could have taken away their O. That's like me taking a look at Gennady Golovkin and, you know, when he fought Dominic Wade, and me saying overall, like, oh, man, you know, he took that guy's O away. Like, what is Canelo Alvarez doing? Like, that just doesn't make any sense to me. I'm sorry.
In the matchup, he took his O. Inoue he's fighting a 40-year-old Donaire, and it was a tug-of-war style fight where he had a broken jaw and like a broken nose in that particular fight, or his
he didn't have a broken jaw, but I believe he had a broken orbital eye bone.
He had facial damage from taking them left hooks and them punches from a powerful 40-year-old Donaire. You ain't never seen Terence Crawford get in any kind of fistic fight, and at the end of the fight, Terence Crawford got a broken jaw. Terence Crawford got, you know, broken orbitals and knee cert.
Right, but we're going to use this point. I mean, just in my view, I just don't think that that's the greatest point in the world. And if we're going to go there, Terence Bud Crawford should have been counted as a knockdown in the Aegis Kavaliauskas fight because he got knocked down in that fight. For those of you that really want to mention that, you know, so Terence Bud Crawford, you can mention that he doesn't have a broken orbital eye bone or anything like that. But against Jose Benavidez, he did struggle a little bit. He did lose some rounds. Against Aegis Kavaliauskas, he lost a good 3 to 4 rounds potentially in that fight, you know, when it came down to it. And on top of that, he got knocked down in that fight, or it should have been counted as a knockdown. And then against Sean Porter, now to be fair, that's an A-grade level fighter, he lost a good 4 rounds in that fight. So if we're going to talk about that, when it comes down to it, if you want to talk about, orbital eye bones, well, besides that, Inoue's pretty much been astronomically dominant in every other fight. And if we are going to go there, he's probably been slightly more dominant than Terence Crawford, just ever so slightly. But once again, what puts Terence Crawford just slightly ahead of Inoue for me is that Errol Spence Jr. win.
This just never happened. Out of all the litany of styles that he's faced, that has never happened. So there's no way I could put Inoue. I like him. He's technical. But the divisions he's in, he's clearly the best in that weight class. And, he's just the most dynamic guy down there. Terence Crawford is really in some popping divisions, not really when he was...
I think you meant one popping division.
At 35 and 40, but
Right, so he's only been in one popping division. And to be fair, he's only really ever fought two guys there that were worth a damn. Sean Porter and Errol Spence Jr. But I understand what Ego is saying. At the end of the day, it is going to be harder for Inoue to really be the definitive number one pound-for-pound fighter. If Terence Crawford remains undefeated, or if Canelo kind of crawls back, or even Usyk, because a lot of people just don't know a lot of the fighters down there. And to be fair, a lot of the times fighters down in those weight divisions, they're not always the most talented. So I understand what Ego is trying to say. But to be fair to Mr. Inoue, he has defeated some very good fighters. He defeated Emmanuel Rodriguez, who ended up defeating one of the Russell brothers. He ended up defeating Steven Fulton. He ended up defeating Payano. He ended up defeating that of Donaire, even though he was a bit older, sure. But if you wanted to debate those, you could. But I do agree that I would probably have Crawford just ever so slightly above Inoue.
Or so 40. But, listen, it doesn't even matter. He beat the...
Are you going to let the greedy heating companies and their crazy high prices decide if your family is allowed to stay warm?
He beat the match of the century for undisputed. So he was...
Yes, and that's the main point that you're bringing up. All these other stupid points overall that people bring up, I never get them. Oh, well, he had a broken orbital eye bone, and they always bring these points up when they don't want a fighter to really be the number one pound-for-pound fighter. Like when they take a look at Tyson Fury, he always brings up this stupid shit about, this is why I can never have Tyson Fury as an all-time great heavyweight, because he's been knocked down several times in his career and blah, blah, blah. All this sort of stupid bullshit. But then Wilder can fight all these damn bums, look like shit against some of these fighters, and he's one of the best heavyweights of all time. Come on.
First to be 2X undisputed. I get it that Inoue did it in a shorter period of time, but this also politics. Sometimes it aligns like that. Them fighters in the little booger weight, snot weight divisions and stuff, they don't have all the complexities. It's easier to make some of those fights. There's not a bunch of sides of the street, and these are big, high-profile names like Keith Thurman.
I understand what Mr. Ego is trying to say, and I don't think that that's always, I don't think that that's necessarily the worst point in the world. I kind of agree with him there. But even with Inoue and Steven Fulton, when that fight could have been potentially, trouble to make, Inoue took that fight immediately.
Errol Spence, Ugas Crawford, Virgil Ortiz, Conor Benn, who all got their own individual situations.
Right, and you know what? Crawford probably could have potentially had more fights on his resume. But it's really his fault that he doesn't have those, because he didn't sign with the PBC for so damn long. But I understand what Ego is trying to say.
And you have to navigate through those waters to make those fights. That's why Jaron Ennis never fought Virgil Ortiz.
And at the end of the day, once again, if we're going to debate that, you can say that all you want to, but we have to go off of what happened and, not what shoulda, coulda, woulda, and, boxing politics, all sort of shit. Well, you can mention boxing politics all you want to. We can talk about Wilder versus AJ and talk about boxing politics all we want to, and how Wilder allegedly didn't get all these fights because he was being avoided. And, it's probably slightly true to a degree. But at the end of the day, when you take a look at it, what happened. AJ has to be counted over Deontay Wilder. He has the resume. He has the skills over him. He has the belts over him. It is what it is. But that being said, Inoue and Crawford are just way too close. And that, the category, once again, that just puts Crawford slightly ahead of Inoue, in my view, is just that Errol Spence win.
And Virgil Ortiz is moving up in weight. You know what I'm saying? So I can't really even compare that. Terence Crawford, he was the first to do it. And his path is his path. In a way, it just so happened the fights that he needed to become undisputed, his promotional team was able to get those fights. but that's more politics.
Right, and Crawford probably could have got those fights a little bit earlier, but that was his damn fault, and you've said that also for years. You know, so interesting, all of a sudden there's a little bit of a change.
Than anything else. So I agree with Shakur Stevenson. This is not even debatable. The guy got more fights, Terence Crawford. The guy,
which is a zero factor,
fought more variety in styles, Terence
That's debatable.
Crawford. And even like, look at Errol Spence Jr. versus that's who Terence Crawford just fought to become undisputed, no?
Right, once again, that's the best point overall that you could possibly make. All this other stupid bullshit about he has more fights. Who cares about who has more fights? He has more fights. Terence Bud Crawford has been fighting bums for the majority of his career. You know, it is what it is. And I like Terence Bud Crawford. He's a great fighter. But really, Jose Benavidez, Aegis Kavalaskas, Jeff Horn, Felix Diaz, like, you know, Ted, you know, who the fuck is that one dude? You know, Hank Lundy, you know, all the, like, come on.
And then, in a way, just fought Marvin the Martian or whatever the dude's name is, Marlon Wayans. Look up Marlon, say Chief.
Marlon Tapales. But I understand. Marlon Tapales, in my view, I don't think I would rank him as an A-grade level fighter either.
Before the fight, he was like 37-3 or something like that with 3 knockouts. So he ain't no Errol Spence Jr. in his division.
Right, but I don't think that anyone is saying that Marlon Tapales is an Errol Spence Jr. I think if you were going to debate for Inoue, that you would debate that Steven Coolboy Fulton overall was the Errol Spence Jr. I think that's what you would debate, but I'm not quite sure if I would even agree with that.
That's why, like, bro, we're just look
because
at...
The thing is about Terence Bud Crawford and Errol Spence, the thing is about Terence Bud Crawford and Naoya Inoue, they've both only ever had one fight where it was looked at as the fight of the century or the fight of their life. They've only ever had one fight that was debatably like that.
The man got 4 losses now, and he had 3 losses before. So that means he had 2 knockouts. He had been knocked out 2 times before Inoue even got him, and he had lost 3 fights. So lost 3 fights, one of them being in 2019 against, who is it? So in 2019, Marlon, he fought and lost to Kenan Ryu or whoever this dude is by knockout in the 11th round. And he was dropped in rounds 3 and round 11. Ain't nobody dropped Errol Spence before Terence Crawford. So just looking at the last opponent in which those...
Right, but you don't compare Marlon Tapales and Errol Spence Jr. You would have to compare Errol Spence Jr. and Steven Coolboy Fulton. But what puts Errol Spence Jr. above Fulton is that Spence had defeated repeated A-grade fighters, whether it be Ugas, you know, debatably, Danny Garcia, Kell Brook when he was still an A-grade level fighter, Sean Porter. That's what puts Errol Spence Jr. as the biggest win between the two of those fighters.
Fighters became 2x undisputed. My point has now been made. This man Crawford...
Right, but a lot of these points, in my view, I just don't think that they're argued in the best of ways. I somewhat agree with Boxing Ego's conclusion, but I think a lot of the points that he brings up just aren't the best argued. I mean, we're talking about who has more fights, and overall you're comparing Marlon Tapales to that of Errol Spence Jr. Like, you have to compare Errol Spence Jr. to Steven Coolboy Fulton. That's like me, you know, if I'm comparing, Floyd Mayweather's career to that of Canelo Alvarez's, and I say, oh, well, Floyd beat Manny Pacquiao. You know, Canelo, like, let's compare. Canelo beats Caleb Plant. Like, you don't compare it like that. Yet, if you're talking about Floyd beating Manny Pacquiao, then you have to talk about Canelo beating Gennady Golovkin. You have to compare what their biggest win is.
For beat Errol Spence, who was recognized on the pound-for-pound list. Ain't nobody had Marlon Wayans or Marlon Brando or whatever this dude's name is. Ain't nobody had him on no pound-for-pound.
Right, Ego, but you're sounding like a gigantic idiot. No one is saying that Marlon Tapales was on the pound-for-pound list. Inoue also knocked out Steven Coolboy Fulton this year. Did you have Steven Coolboy Fulton on your pound-for-pound list? You don't talk about a fighter that isn't comparable overall to that fighter.
At all. So, Errol was regarded, and then now people are saying, and I'm not saying this is right, I'm just going off of fans, but fans are now calling for Errol Spence's retirement. They're like, oh, he need to retire based on...
He very well might need to. After that ass whooping, I watch that fight probably a good, maybe even once a week potentially. Every single time I see those highlights, it just gets worse and worse. That ass whooping gets worse and worse every single time that I watch it.
On the butt kicking from Terence Crawford. I've literally seen comments that suggest
the butt kicking from Terence Bud Crawford puts it in a censored way. No, he got skinned alive in that fight. Errol Spence overall was terrible in that fight.
That said, oh, Errol Spence, he got to hang it up, he got to wrap it up, wompty, because of how one-sided the beatdown was. Nobody said that about the...
Not even one-sided overall about the beatdown. It's just how bad it was.
Marlon dude, because nobody was really even checking for him. I know for a fact he was.
Right, but come on, Ego. Like, once again, a lot of these points are just idiotic points. Like, they make no fucking sense. Like, why would you even bring up something like that? No one overall is, even saying that about that. Well, the reason why people are calling for Errol Spence to retire is because a lot of people also think that he has a lot of wear and tear because of the car accidents and also because of the fighters that he's fought. And now he loses to Terence Bud Crawford like this, and he's not a young guy. He's not a young guy at all. When it comes down to it, he's a guy that at the end of the day, he's like, what, 34 right now? Or 33? He's not as young as, some of these guys that Inoue has fought. At least with Fulton, if you're going to, debate that, what is he, like 20-something? So at the end of the day, no one's going to be calling for Steve Von Fulton's retirement. But for Errol Spence, you would understand why. So a lot of these points are just idiotic.
Wasn't on nobody's pound-for-pound list. So great win to Inoue. He's a beast. He got skill. But this is a no contest. Y'all try to make things more...
No, I'm not going to say it's not a no contest. But I would say that Terence Bud Crawford does edge him out just by a little bit. And I would have to give the clear decision to that of Terence Bud Crawford. But I'm not going to say that it's just absolutely not debatable. And the reason why I say that, once again, is because had Inoue not had that win over Stevon Coolboy Fulton, then I would get it. Then I would get it a little bit more to say that it's not even a debate. But they both had a win over an elite black American fighter this year that a lot of people were calling for them to fight. And they both dismantled that fighter in completion. And on top of that, they both had very similar accomplishments. So I can't say that it's not even close. I understand, but I can't say that it's not even close.
Complicated than need be, especially when it involves a black fighter like Terence Crawford. Now it's like, oh.
Right, and this is basically what the guys are going to allege when it comes to the, they're going to go with the racism angle and all sort of stuff. Even though a lot of these guys, they were claiming overall, even when Canelo was fighting a lot of great fighters, that fighters with way lesser resumes were above him.
Oh, I don't know. I'm scratching my head. There's nothing to scratch your head about. As I've broken down in this unpacked video, Crawford has more fights. Crawford...
Once again, which is a zero factor. No one fucking cares about who has more fights on their resume. If you have more fights, great on you. That means jack shit unless you fought more champions or you accomplished more in your career. More fights doesn't mean anything. Gervonta Tank Davis has more fights than that of Devin Haney. Would you put him over that of Devin Haney on the pound-for-pound list? Because he has damn near 30 fights or 30-something fights, and Devin Haney only has like 22, fights. Like, does that make any fucking sense? Like, come on.
He became 2X undisputed before Inoue, and in the same year as Inoue. People keep bragging that Inoue did it in a shorter period of time. That's all based on politics. Inoue got 26.
It's also based on the fact that Inoue fought the fighters that he needed to and didn't do this bullshit where he didn't sign with the right promotion just like Terence Bud Crawford did.
Fights and no losses with 23 knockouts. That's great. Crawford got 40 with 31 knockouts. I mean...
Right, once again, what does that really have to do unless overall you're talking about him fighting more champions? That's the only thing that matters. Who gives a shit really about the knockout percentage overall and that of the amount of wins that you have unless you fought more champions? No one cares.
So the volume in which Crawford has been on top has been longer. So the longevity's on Crawford's side.
Who cares about longevity once again unless you're fighting fights that actually matter? Who cares? And once again, was this a point for Canelo Alvarez? Because Canelo been fighting longer than that of Terence Bud Crawford. That was never a point for Canelo Alvarez. These guys never mentioned, oh, well, Canelo Alvarez has more wins on his resume. He has more knockouts and, he's been fighting for a longer period of time. Like, who would bring up that stupid-ass point?
Hopefully, the southpaw that it took to beat, to become undisputed a second time, Errol Spence is by far a more accomplished and decorated southpaw that Crawford beat to become 2X undisputed, as opposed to Inoue's a southpaw opponent from the Philippines who had already been stopped.
Right, no shit. But no one's comparing Marlon Tapales, and overall that besides you with your dumb ass. You have to compare Stephon Fulton and Errol Spence Jr. Now, in my view, Errol Spence is a fighter that would be above Stephon Coolboy Fulton in my view. So that's why Crawford would be above Inoue slightly. But a lot of these points are just idiotic.
Twice. What are we talking about? Errol Spence.
No, what are you talking about? Like, these points are so fucking stupid. Oh, Inoue, he doesn't have, the amount of wins or the amount of knockouts that Terence Crawford has. It's like, dude, who gives a shit? Like you really want to mention that? Let's talk about Floyd Mayweather Jr. then, compared to some other fighters for the amount of fights that they have. We're going to bring up that point. Now, to be fair, Floyd Mayweather Jr. is an undefeated fighter, and a lot of other fighters are not. But come on.
I don't even remember him being dropped before Terence Crawford. Crawford drops him 3 times and made it look...
And if we're going to bring up stupid-ass points like that, once again, let's talk about how Terence Bud Crawford has actually been hurt and stunned and almost knocked down, and knocked down more times than Inoue in his career. Inoue has never been knocked down from what I know, and the only time I've ever seen him really badly hurt or damn near knocked down was maybe potentially in the Donaire fight, and even there, I don't think it happened.
Like, way different levels. Shakur is 1,000% right. This is not even a debate.
No, Shakur Stevenson, in my view, is not 1,000% right. Now, I agree that Crawford is the number one guy, but just because you put Inoue as your number one guy doesn't mean you're trying to take away credit from Crawford when it comes down to it. It just might mean that you believe that. But that's up to you. Now, in my view, it depends on how debatable it is. If Inoue did not have the win over Stephon Coolboy Fulton and their resumes, weren't even close, then I would kind of get it. I would say that Crawford probably has a slightly better resume. But Crawford is not someone that's like a Floyd Mayweather Jr. He didn't fight repeated great champion after repeated great champion. He's only fought, I believe, about maybe 10 champions in his career who held the belt at the time. Khan and Brook, when he fought them, were completely done as fighters. So at the end of the day, I would get it if Crawford was like a Floyd Mayweather Jr. or Andre Ward type of figure. He's not.
You put Crawford in there with different people, and one person comes out, and it's always been Crawford thus far. And it's going to take probably him to fight someone bigger or outside of his weight class, his current weight class, for that to change. Got to be Crawford. Easy work.
Right, but Terence Bud Crawford also has not fought someone outside of his weight class, really, because he's a natural welterweight. But I understand what Ego is saying. He's saying that in his view, and this is why I say a lot of the LDBC and new media channels, they're not ever going to put Inoue as the number one pound-for-pound fighter. But to be honest, I can't completely get after them for that, because at the moment, I also would have Crawford over Inoue because of the same reasons, at least the same reason, just in terms of believing that Crawford is in a better division on average usually, at least in terms of the welterweight division. But we'll see where that goes. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. I just thought that I would talk about that. Thank you all so much for watching. I think that it actually is a great debate. I'm not going to say that there's no debate between the fighters, but because of the Errol Spence Jr. win, I would have to give that to Terence Bud Crawford, just in my view. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching.